So this happened to me about 5 years ago when I was 22 and working as an assistant manager at an electronics retail store in the suburbs. My schedule was all over the place, but that Thursday I was closing, which meant getting out around 10 p.m. It felt like a pretty safe area, near houses, right off the highway, bright parking lot lights, and security that cruised through now and then. Store policy was that we walked each other out, so when we finished closing, I waited in the back hallway while the last sales guy grabbed his stuff. His car was out front by the restaurants. Mine was in the employee spots in the back lot. We said goodnight where the hallway split and went our separate ways, him toward the front doors and me toward the service exit. When I pushed the bar on the service door, the lot behind the building was almost empty. In our little employee corner, it was just my gray Honda Civic under a light pole and one other car way off to the side. It was mid-September, already dark, and I stepped out, let the door close behind me, and automatically pulled out my phone. I started walking toward my car while scrolling messages, barely looking up. About halfway there, I remembered my keys were at the bottom of my bag, so I finally lifted my eyes from the screen. That's when I saw the white van parked 3 rows from my Civic. Plain, windowless sides, angled in the space like it had just pulled through. I went back to digging for my keys, but something made me glance over my shoulder toward the edge of the lights. There, maybe 50 meters behind me where the asphalt turned dark, a man in a dark hooded jacket was standing. He was turned in my direction, hands in his pockets, not leaning on a car, not walking, not looking at a phone, just standing there. For a second, I told myself he was waiting for someone and I was being paranoid. Still, I hit the unlock button on my key fob from where I was and heard the locks click on my car. I shifted my bag higher, walked faster, and tried not to make it obvious that I was speeding up. When I reached the Honda, I grabbed the driver's handle, and before opening the door, I forced myself to look back again. The man wasn't at the edge of the light anymore. He was walking toward me. He still wasn't running, just coming in this slow, steady way with his hands in his pockets like he had nowhere else to be. My stomach clenched and my mouth went dry. I yanked the door open, slid into the driver's seat, slammed it shut, and hit the lock button until I heard all the latches thump. With my hands shaking, I shoved the key into the ignition, started the engine, and flipped on the headlights. The beam swept across the empty spaces and caught him again, now maybe 10 meters from my front bumper, still walking straight at the car like the light didn't bother him at all. I threw the car into reverse, cranked the wheel hard, and backed out of the space faster than I usually would, checking only that nothing was behind me. As I straightened the wheel and rolled toward the lane that wrapped around the building, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He had stopped again, just standing in the middle of the drive, body turned toward my car, hood still hiding his face. Every part of me wanted to get away from there as fast as I could, so I took the loop and pulled onto the road past the plaza. My plan was to go home on my usual route, get on the highway, and pretend this was just one weird moment. At the first traffic light, the signal flipped to red, and I eased to a stop in the lane behind another car. In my side mirror, I saw 2 cars back in the other lane, a white van with side panels sitting at the same light. My hands started shaking on the wheel. This could be a coincidence, but an inner voice was screaming that it wasn't. When the light turned green, I drove straight instead of making my usual right turn toward my neighborhood. I tried to act like I had just changed my mind, even though no one could see my face or probably cared. In the mirror, I watched the white van roll through the light and stay in my lane. I kept telling myself it was normal. Delivery vans went everywhere, but my chest felt tight and my hands were damp on the wheel. At the next intersection, I signaled left onto a main street that led away from my area and my normal route. A few seconds later, the van's turn signal flashed too, and it made the same turn, keeping a couple of cars behind. That was the moment I stopped making excuses and accepted that this was actually happening. There were other cars around us, which helped a little, but my brain was already running through plans. I thought about driving to a police station, but I had no idea where the closest one was from there, and I didn't want to start fumbling with my phone and maps while driving. I thought about pulling into a gas station or a grocery store lot, but I had this image of the van blocking me in or someone yanking my door open. I didn't want to freak out over nothing, but I also really didn't want to be the person who ignored their gut and ended up on the news. At the next long red light, I finally grabbed my phone and called my friend Jessica. She answered with her usual, "What's up?" And I cut her off and said, "Can I come over? I think someone's following me." My voice sounded weirdly flat. She flipped from casual to serious immediately and started asking where I was, if I was driving, if I was sure. I told her there was this plain white van that had been behind me since I left work, matching every turn. I remember hearing her moving around, opening drawers or something, and she said, "Come straight here. I'll turn the porch light on and tell Marcus, stay on main roads. Don't stop anywhere alone." So that's what I did. I stayed on the bigger streets with traffic and lights instead of the back way I usually took to her place. Every time I turned, I checked my mirrors. Every time, the van made the same turn. It never rode my bumper or pulled right up next to me. It just kept its distance, far enough back that if I hadn't been looking for it, I probably wouldn't have noticed. I kept talking to Jessica on speaker, giving her cross streets and how many cars were between us, mostly to stop myself from spiraling. She stayed calm and just kept saying, "You're close. Keep driving. You're okay." This went on for about 20 minutes, even though it felt a lot longer. Eventually, I turned into Jessica's subdivision off a main road and checked the mirror again. The van turned in after me. By then, my heart was pounding, but I made myself keep my speed normal, use my signal, stop fully at the signs. I didn't want to give whoever was in that van any excuse to cut me off or force something. When I finally pulled up to Jessica's house, she was already on the porch with her phone in her hand and her boyfriend Marcus standing next to her. The porch light and living room light were both on, and the front door was open behind them. I braked in the driveway, threw the car in park, and got out faster than I meant to. Jessica was already coming down the steps toward me. Over her shoulder, I saw the white van roll slowly past the house. I could see the shape of someone behind the windshield, but not their face. There were no company logos, no writing, just blank white panels. As it reached the corner at the end of the street, it suddenly sped up and turned, disappearing out of sight. Marcus watched it go with his arms crossed and said quietly that he didn't like that at all. Once we were inside, Marcus locked the door, and Jessica sat me on the couch. She said we should call the police right away, and I agreed. I wanted it on record in case anything else ever happened, even if they couldn't do much. She put the call on speaker, and I told the dispatcher everything, starting with leaving the store and seeing the guy in the hood, ending with the van passing their house. An officer showed up a little later, took my ID, and had me go through the story again while he wrote notes. He was professional, but blunt. Without a plate number or some unique marking, there wasn't much they could do besides drive around and keep an eye out. He did tell me I was smart not to go straight home and not to stop in an empty lot. I stayed at Jessica's that night because the idea of driving back alone felt like a bad decision. None of us slept great. Every time a car went by outside, I tensed up, and Marcus would get up to look out the window. The next morning, after they left for work, I drove to a shop and had an alarm system installed on my Civic. After that, I went to a store and bought pepper spray for my keychain. None of that erased what happened, but it made me feel a little less like an easy target, and since then, I never park in the far corners of big parking lots if I can help it, and I always watch my mirrors and pay attention to whether anyone is following me before I get in my car or head toward home. It started with missed calls from an unknown number. 6 calls in one evening. No voicemails. I figured it was a wrong number or some auto-dialer glitch, so I muted my phone and kept watching TV while it lit up on the coffee table. The thing was how precise it was. For the next few nights, always between 9 and 11, the same number called over and over. Always when I was home alone in my apartment. No texts, no voicemail. On the third night I called back. It just rang and rang until it disconnected, so I blocked it. After that, the calls stopped for about a week, and I relaxed back into my normal routine. Then Saturday morning I walked down to the parking lot and froze. A long scratch ran along the entire driver's side of my car, from the headlight to the tail light, deep enough that white primer showed through the paint. It didn't look like a random scrape from someone parking badly. It looked like someone had dragged a key in a straight line on purpose. I took photos from every angle and went straight to the apartment office to ask about security cameras. The manager pulled up last night's footage on her monitor. The camera covering my row was old and pointed too high, so my car sat half in frame. Around 2 in the morning, a shape moved between the cars, but whoever it was stayed right in the blind spot. No face, no license plate, nothing clear enough for a report. She sighed and said it was probably kids messing around, told me I could file a vandalism notice for the record, and promised to request an extra camera for that corner, warning it would take a few weeks to install. 3 days after the scratch, I was working from home late, finishing a presentation with our corporate messenger open. The app shows green dots when people are online. Around midnight, I noticed Trent from marketing was active. He's the guy who shuts his laptop at 6 on the dot, and his wife had just had a baby, so it stuck out. I watched his status stay green while I edited slides. After 10 minutes, I sent him a question about a file, half curious whether he was there. A minute later, his dot flipped to away, then offline, no reply. The next morning in the office kitchen, we were both waiting on the coffee machine, so I asked if he'd been working late. Trent frowned and said he hadn't opened his work laptop at home all week, that after 6, he was on baby duty. He joked about surviving on hours of sleep, but my stomach dropped. Whoever I'd seen online clearly wasn't him, and they'd gone offline the second I reached out. I forwarded the timestamps to IT with a note. 2 days later, admin Kyle called me back to say they'd found unauthorized access following my activity. Kyle explained that whoever it was had been logging in through accounts and opening the same files I did a few seconds later, like they were shadowing my work. The log showed the connection hopping between locations. The IP address kept changing so much they couldn't trace where it came from. They reset my credentials, forced password changes on my accounts, and turned on every kind of two-factor authentication they could. I went home that night feeling safer on my laptop, and less safe everywhere else. Around 8, I reached my door and saw a cardboard box on my doormat. I took the box inside, saw there was no label, and opened it over the sink. Inside was a photo frame and a printed note that said, "For your memories." That was when it stopped feeling like coincidence. I called my friend Sarah and asked her to stay over. On my couch with laptops, we went through social media. She found a fake profile with my name, pictures, and strangers for friends, created 3 weeks earlier. I reported it, locked everything down, called non-emergency, and after report, the officer suggested installing a doorbell camera and being careful with information online. The next couple of weeks were mostly quiet, and for a bit I let myself think maybe the box and the fake profile were just some messed up prank that had burned out. I still checked the peephole before opening the door, and double-checked the deadbolt at night, but I went back to my normal places. Grocery store, gym, work, home. I tried to act like nothing had changed because I did not want my whole life built around some creep. That lasted until a Saturday afternoon when I came out of the supermarket with my hands full of bags and saw a new scratch on my car. This time it was along the passenger side, lower down. The old damage from the apartment lot was still there, so I could see this one was fresh. Same kind of line, like someone had dragged something sharp in one motion. I looked around the parking lot, trying to see if anyone was watching me. Nobody was. Families loading trunks, someone pushing a cart, a guy on his phone. It all looked normal except for my stomach dropping. I took pictures, went back inside, and asked about cameras. The manager said they only had them on the entrance and registers, not the section of the lot where I parked. He gave me a sorry face, but there was nothing else. I called the police, added it to the original report. The woman on the phone sounded polite and tired at the same time. She said vandalism like that was hard to solve unless they caught someone on video. About a week later, it happened again. I drove to the gym after work, parked, went inside, did my normal routine. When I came out, it was already dark. I did a quick walk around my car, because by then that had become a habit, and there it was, another long scrape over the back bumper. 3 different locations now. Home, supermarket, gym. Different days, different times. It did not feel like coincidence anymore. Whoever it was knew what I drove and where I went. Driving home, I kept going over my schedule in my head. I always went to the same grocery store, same gym, parked in the same spots without thinking. By the time I pulled into my apartment lot, one name kept coming up. Devin. He used to work in my company, a couple of rows over. 6 months earlier, after a company party, he had walked me to my car and asked me out. I had told him I did not see him that way. In front of other people, he laughed it off, made a joke, but later he sent me this long message about how I had led him on and how women like me thought we were too good for guys like him. A month after that, he had a huge argument with management and quit. Devin was good with computers. He was the type people went to when something broke before they opened a ticket. When IT told me someone was mirroring my activity and the IP kept changing, I thought of him, then pushed it away because it felt dramatic. After the 3rd time my car was keyed, it did not feel dramatic anymore. I told Sarah my theory. She said it was possible, but reminded me we did not have anything real tying him to it, and that if I went to the police with just a feeling, they would not do much. She was right, but I still brought up his name the next time an officer called to follow up. I gave them his full name, where he had worked, the messages after the party, and the fact he had technical skills. The officer said they would note it, then explained very carefully that people leave jobs all the time, and having hurt feelings was not a crime. Without direct threats or proof, they could not just pick someone and call him a stalker. I understood what she was saying. It still did not help me sleep. After that, I changed my routines on purpose. Different grocery store, different gym nights, different parking spots. I stopped posting anything in real time. If I shared a photo, it was hours later. I asked a coworker to walk with me to my car when we stayed late. It helped a little, but every time I found a new scratch or caught someone glancing in my direction, my brain went straight back to Devin or some faceless guy who knew everything about me. 2 months later, I decided I was done trying to feel safe in that apartment. There had not been any new packages or weird calls, but I kept jumping at every noise in the hallway. I found a new place across town, signed the lease as fast as I could, and did not put in a forwarding address. I changed my phone number, updated all my passwords again, cleaned up my social media, and gave my new address only to work, my parents, and 2 close friends. At the office, I asked IT to check my account one more time. They said everything looked normal now. No strange activity, no shadow logins. The keyed car stopped. The random calls never came back. From the outside, it looked like the whole thing had just faded out, but I still had no proof of who it was, and that part did not fade with anything. Not knowing who was watching, not understanding why it started, and not being sure if it really ended or if he is just waiting. That is what I live with now. In the new apartment, I still walk around at night and push on every window to make sure it is locked. I still feel my pulse jump when an unfamiliar number shows up on my phone, even if it is just a doctor's office. I still pause in parking lots and look around before I step out of the car. My therapist says it is normal to be this on edge after what she calls prolonged stalking. Says my brain is stuck on high alert, and it might take years before I feel safe again. The police never caught anyone because every single thing that happened stayed just inside the line of what they could act on. Public places, vandalism, fake profiles, anonymous calls. But putting it all together, I know it was someone obsessed with me, someone who mapped out my life and got close enough to my door to leave a box there. And I have no idea if he knows where I live now, if he already found my new address, or if he is out there right now planning his next move. I've been working as a courier since last year, and this really weird experience still freaks me out. I was 22 then, doing a lot of night deliveries and living alone in a small studio in an industrial area. After midnight, the only lit place around was a 24-hour pharmacy, less than a kilometer from my building. After my last run, I'd usually walk there, grab an energy drink, then head home. The neighborhood was sketchy, abandoned warehouses, few streetlights, drunk groups on weekends. But after a couple years, I thought I knew its rhythm. That night, it was around 2 a.m. when I stepped out of the pharmacy with 2 cans in a plastic bag. When I'd gone in, there had been an empty old hatchback in the lot. Now the car was gone, and a dark sedan sat a few spaces from the door with the engine running and the lights off. The windows were tinted. I couldn't see the driver, but I felt watched. I told myself not to stare. People wait in cars all the time. Maybe they were picking someone up. I walked off the lot to the sidewalk like normal, bag in one hand, phone in the other. My apartment was down a dead-end alley off the main road, maybe a 5-minute walk. I had gone maybe half a block when I heard the sedan roll out behind me. I waited for it to pass. It didn't. It stayed back, matching my speed, about 20 meters away. I glanced over my shoulder. Same car, same distance, nothing else on the road. I slowed down near a closed auto shop and pretended to check my phone. The sedan eased to a stop too. No turn signal, no window down, just idling. My chest tightened. I started walking again, a little faster. A few seconds later, I heard the engine pick up as it crawled forward to keep the gap the same. Right then, I made a decision. I was not leading this guy straight to the dead end where I lived. At the corner where I'd usually turn toward my alley, I kept going straight and headed for a brighter street with a couple of bars and some people smoking outside. I heard the sedan speed up a bit. Then it turned behind me. Halfway down that street, I stopped under a street light and turned around like I just remembered something. The sedan stopped too, right in the lane. The driver didn't move. No phone glow, no cigarette, nothing. Just sitting there, facing me. We were far enough apart that I couldn't make out his face, but it felt like we were looking straight at each other. Running felt like it would just trigger a chase, and going home was out of the question. So I acted like I'd changed my mind and ducked into the closest bar. Inside was the usual late-night noise. I went to the counter, asked the bartender for a glass of water, said I'd just finished work. I took a small table near the front window where I could see the street. The sedan had moved to the curb directly across from the bar, still idling, still dark. I pretended to scroll my phone and watched it out of the corner of my eye. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. The car didn't move an inch. My leg wouldn't stop bouncing. The bartender came over again, leaned on the table and asked, "You all right, man?" I almost told him, "That car's been following me," but then pictured the guy just driving off the second a patrol showed up. Technically, he wasn't doing anything. I didn't want to be the paranoid kid calling the cops on a parked car. So instead, I asked if they had a side exit because I wanted some air. He pointed toward a door by the bathrooms. I finished my water, waited a minute, then walked back like I was going to the restroom and slipped out the side door into a narrow alley. Out there it was quiet. I couldn't hear the engine anymore. I kept my head down and walked fast along the alley, then cut across a couple of back streets I knew from deliveries, taking the long way around. I avoided the main road and kept checking behind me. No sedan, no footsteps, nothing. After a few turns, my shoulders finally dropped a little. I started thinking maybe I'd been overreacting and the guy had just left. After about 10 minutes of cutting through the residential block, I reached the end of a side street that connects to my block from the other direction. I eased up to the corner and looked toward my alley. The same dark sedan was crawling past the mouth of it, moving so slow it was barely rolling, like the driver was studying each doorway. I ducked back into the shadow of a doorway and peeked out. The car reached the end of the street, paused for a second, then made a slow, careful turn and started back the other way, the driver's head turning slightly as he looked from side to side. The driver was clearly searching for me methodically, driving down every street. I quickly turned back from the corner and walked away, keeping buildings between me and the street while I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking. Walking home felt stupid. If this guy was circling the block like that, he was serious. I opened the taxi app and ordered a car to a random nearby building, not my actual address. While I waited, I stood in that building's entrance like I lived there and watched the intersection. A minute later, the dark sedan rolled past again, barely moving. It slowed exactly where I would have come out on my normal route. Under the streetlight, I saw the driver, middle-aged, wearing a cap, plain face, eyes straight ahead, completely calm. The app said the taxi would take about 10 minutes. I stayed in the doorway, listening for that engine and refusing to step out. At one point, I noticed I was squeezing my keys between my fingers and forced myself to stop. When the notification finally buzzed, I checked the plate from the doorway and only then went out. The taxi was an older hatchback with a tired-looking driver. I got in fast, locked the door, and told him it had been a long shift. I gave my street but asked him to drop me 2 houses down. On the way there, I kept checking the rear window, but no dark car followed us or turned when we turned. When we reached my block, there was no dark car. The driver stopped 2 houses past my entrance. I paid, got out, checked directions, and saw nothing. I walked until the taxi turned the corner, then cut across the yard and ran to my door. Inside, I hurried up to the 3rd floor, locked my apartment, checked the lock again, and finally let myself breathe. For the next few nights, I didn't go out. I ordered everything in and skipped my usual pharmacy runs. It felt paranoid, but thinking about that sedan on my street made my chest tighten. After a week, I told myself I had to act normal and decided to go back there, but during the day. One afternoon after work, I went into the pharmacy, and the same cashier was there. While she rang me up, I asked if they got many customers late at night. She stared at me and said a man had come in about a week earlier, asking about a tall guy in a black jacket who came there at night. She said he hadn't known my name but had described me exactly and said I seemed local. He'd asked if I came at the same time and if I always walked. She told him she couldn't share anything and acted confused, and he just thanked her and left. That hit me harder than seeing his car. It meant he'd been tracking my habits. On the way home, I stayed on busy streets and watched every parked sedan. That night, I moved my table so I could watch the street without standing right in front of the window. I never went back to that pharmacy after dark and stopped using the dead-end alley unless I had no choice. I picked up habits like circling the block if a car stayed behind me, or slowing before my turn to see who followed. It's been a while, and I haven't seen that same sedan again. but any dark car that slows near me still makes my whole body tense. And not knowing what that man wanted from some random courier is what scares me most. It happened last year when I got promoted to safety supervisor at this chemical plant outside Houston. Working at a place that handles hazardous materials is never simple, but I honestly thought I could handle it. I was 26, had been in industrial safety for 4 years, and I knew the regulations well enough that I could quote half of them in my sleep. The plant has 4 production buildings, a warehouse complex, and an admin block, all spread out across this fenced-in property that feels like its own little world at night. When the previous safety supervisor left for a better job, they slid me into her spot. Nights only, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. That shift usually means I am the only safety officer on site with a skeleton crew of operators and maintenance, which sounded peaceful on paper, and in the first couple weeks it actually was. Most nights I started in the control room, checked the monitoring software, then did my patrols. Building 1 through 4, warehouse, back around to admin. I'd check ventilation systems, verify chemical storage temperatures, look at relief valves, and walk the lines to see if anyone was cutting corners. It was boring in the way safety work is supposed to be boring. If nothing happens, you're doing your job. A couple operators joked that I was overkill, that the automated systems would tell us if anything went wrong before I ever saw it on a walkdown. I joked back that automated systems don't testify well in court. Still, in the beginning, the alarms made sense when they happened. A door propped open that shouldn't be. A brief power flicker. Someone forgetting to acknowledge a panel warning in time. Around midsummer, the pattern shifted. It wasn't anything big at first, just small things that sat wrong with me. A temperature probe in Building 3 spiked for 15 seconds and then dropped back to normal while the local gauge never moved. A tank level in the software showed a sudden dip like someone had pulled product, but the manual dip check showed the same as the day before. I chalked it up to glitches and logged everything, but I noticed I was writing, "No physical deviation observed," a lot more than I liked. The night operators started asking if the system was haunted, which I ignored because joking about bad data is easier than admitting you don't know why it is happening. Building 1 is the oldest structure, built in the 1970s, where we store chemical reagents in large tanks. I am required to check the gas sensor readings every 2 hours. Twice in 1 month, the gas leak sensors in Sector B triggered alarms showing a potential leak. Both times it was around 2 in the morning, when the plant is at its quietest. Each time, I grabbed the emergency detection equipment, radioed that I was heading to Building 1, and drove over there in the little utility cart we use when we need to move fast between buildings. Walking into a possible gas release alone is not something you do casually, so I followed procedure step by step. When I got into Sector B the first time, the fixed alarm was still flashing on the wall, but my handheld detector was dead flat. I walked the entire aisle, checked around the flanges and valves, and still got nothing. No reading, no smell, nothing. 7 minutes after the alarm had first triggered, it cleared itself. Back in the control room, the trend graph showed a neat little spike of gas, then a perfect return to baseline right when the system reset. The second time, 2 weeks later, it was almost identical. Same sector, same type of gas, same duration. I responded the same way, verifying with the handheld, checking the tank vents, checking the floor drains. Again, no elevated gas levels anywhere. What bothered me most was that the system would automatically reset exactly 7 minutes after the alarm triggered, as if someone manually shut it off on a timer. But the access log for the Building 1 control substation showed no one had badged into that room during those times. I pulled the historian data, printed it, attached my notes, and filed an incident report. Maintenance called me during day shift, and said they had tested the sensors and everything was functioning within spec. They blamed it on electrical noise or a firmware quirk and told me not to worry unless it started tripping constantly. It never went fully away though. For the next few weeks, every time I walked into Building 1 at night, I found myself glancing at the Sector B heads longer than I needed to. Building 2 was constructed in 2019, and it houses our main production lines. I know a lot of the workers there, including Thomas, a packaging line operator who has been on nights almost as long as I have. Last week, Thomas reported strange sounds coming from the East Wing. He came into the control room around midnight, looked embarrassed, and said, "Rachel, I know this sounds stupid, but is someone running Line 5? Line 5 had been shut down for scheduled maintenance, fully locked out and tagged. According to the schedule, no one should have been near it. He told me he could hear machinery running on Line 5, that specific rumble of the main drive and the clack of the conveyor, even though he was the only one on that side of the floor. When I went to investigate, the sounds had stopped. The East Wing was quiet, except for the low hum from the lines that were actually running. I checked the area, walked beside the idle conveyor, and put my hand on some of the guarding out of habit. Everything felt cold. I thought maybe it was acoustic echo from the adjacent lines that were still operating. But Thomas stood there shaking his head, saying he knew the startup sequence of Conveyor 5, and that was exactly what he had heard. Back in the electrical room, I checked the panel myself. Line 5 was definitely powered down, every breaker in the off position, the lockout tags in place with maintenance's initials and dates written on them. 2 other workers on different nights mentioned hearing the same thing in the East Wing, like Line 5 cycling through its startup, even though it was shut down. I noted each report in the logbook, checked the tag-out documentation again, and walked back to the panel to make sure nothing had been touched since my last round, my eyes going back over every locked handle and hanging red tag. Building 3 is across the street from the main complex, and I absolutely hate going there alone now. It's newer than Building 1 but feels more isolated, like it was tacked on later. 3 weeks ago, my schedule had me doing a routine check of the fire suppression systems over there around 1 in the morning. I remember being annoyed because it meant crossing the street twice and logging into a separate panel, but it was standard. I badged in, did the usual visual checks on the extinguishers and sprinklers, then headed down the maintenance corridor that runs behind the main production floor. There's a heavy hydraulic door at the end of that corridor that tends to drift shut, so I did what we always do and propped it open with one of the rubber door wedges. I made sure it was seated under the edge and watched the door settle against it. It should have stayed put. On the other side of that door is the stairwell to the lower levels and the little control nook where the suppression panel is. I stepped through, checked the gauges, made a note about a slightly low pressure reading on one line, and was halfway through filling out the inspection form when I heard the slam. It wasn't just the latch catching. The hydraulic arm pulled that door closed hard enough that the frame shook. My first thought was that someone had come in behind me, so I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" No one answered. I went back up the few steps and tried the handle. It didn't move. I tried it again harder, putting my shoulder into it. Nothing. The wedge I'd used was lying on my side of the door now, like it had been kicked free before it closed. I checked the stairwell phone, but it was dead. The radios we use sometimes cut out in Building 3's lower levels, and of course that night mine was clipping in and out when I tried to call the control room. I could hear static and maybe a word or two, but I couldn't tell if anyone heard me. After about 5 minutes of trying to get the handle to budge and messing with the radio, I accepted that I was stuck until someone either noticed I was missing or happened to walk by. I'm not proud of how hard I started banging on that door. I used my fist at first, then my flashlight, yelling my name and telling whoever was on the other side that I was in the stairwell. It felt stupid and desperate, but I kept thinking about what would happen if there actually was a fire or a leak and I was locked in there. It was about 20 minutes before I heard Keys and Marcus, one of the night security guards, shouting back that he was opening it. When the door finally swung in, he gave me this baffled look and said, "Rach, why didn't you just pull it open?" From his side, there had been no resistance at all. The wedge wasn't there, obviously, and he said the hydraulic closer felt normal. Later that morning, I asked maintenance to check it. The tech cycled the door over and over while I watched. It behaved exactly like it was supposed to. Slow close, smooth latch, opened fine from both sides. He finally shrugged and said maybe the wedge slipped and the pressure got weird, but he admitted he couldn't explain why the handle jammed for me. Ever since then, I've felt uneasy about Building 3, especially the lower levels in that stairwell. The scariest thing happened last week. I was with Danny, a mechanical engineer with 15 years in, checking the compressor station in the basement of Building 3. After what happened with the door, I had already started asking for a partner anytime I had to go down there, and he didn't mind coming along because he wanted to look at some vibration readings. We were down there with our flashlights and clipboards, walking along the row of compressors, when we suddenly heard a series of loud metallic banging sounds. It wasn't random clatter. The hits were spaced out, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone was hitting the pipes with a heavy wrench on a pattern. 3 strikes, a pause, then 3 more. The sound was coming from the far section where they keep the old unused tanks, past where the lights are always dim. Danny stopped mid-sentence and looked at me. I remember him saying, "You hearing that too?" Just to make sure we were both registering the same thing. We walked toward it with our flashlights, staying side by side. I kept telling myself it was thermal expansion or a loose support or something I could write on a form. The closer we got to the old tank area, the more aware I was of our footsteps and breathing, and the banging kept going in that same pattern until we were almost at the end of the row. We turned the corner where you can see all the way down to the unused tanks. The moment our light beam swept that section, the banging stopped completely. No fade, no last echo, just off like someone had lifted a hand. There was no one there. No tools on the floor, no loose hangers swinging on the pipes. Nothing obviously wrong. Danny scanned the tanks, the overhead lines, checked one of the supports with his hand, and then he just said, very calmly, "Let's go upstairs. Now." During my senior year, I worked as a night librarian at the university library 3 times a week. My shift ran from midnight to 6 in the morning when the library was only open to students with passes, and honestly, I liked that setup. Less noise, less drama, just me behind the registration desk with my laptop, a stack of returns, and a building that mostly felt like it belonged to me. Usually there were 5 or 6 students spread out in the reading rooms, half asleep over their notes while I pretended to work on my thesis instead of scrolling through my draft in panic. That night started normally. I came in at 11:45, dumped my backpack under the desk, and relieved the day librarian. He rubbed his eyes, pointed at the monitor wall, and said, "Cameras are acting up again. 2 of the feeds keep dying." One screen was frozen on static, another was just black. He said IT would look tomorrow-ish, and shrugged like it wasn't his problem anymore. I joked that as long as the front door lock still worked, we were fine. He laughed, signed out, and left me alone with the monitors and the humming lights. The first 2 hours were exactly what I expected. I checked a couple of student IDs at the door, answered one question about where the bathroom was, as if it wasn't in the same place it had been for 100 years, and then sat back down to stare at the same sentence of my thesis until my eyes burned. Every so often I glanced up at the cameras. The bad feeds flickered or froze, but the rest showed the normal stuff. Empty hallways, stairwells, study rooms, and a few hunched figures in hoodies who barely moved. Around 3 in the morning, I did my scheduled walkthrough. I locked my computer, grabbed the keyring and the clipboard, and took the usual loop through the reading rooms. In the first room, 2 guys in sweatshirts were whispering over a laptop. In the second, a girl with headphones had highlighters and sticky notes spread everywhere. In the last one, a guy was half asleep on an open textbook, an energy drink can next to his hand. 5 students total, all with their ID cards visible like the rules said. Nobody looked drunk, nobody had guests, nothing set off any alarms in my head. I ticked 5 names on the sheet and went back toward the desk. When I sat down again, I was already thinking about rewriting my entire thesis conclusion. I woke my laptop, took a sip of coffee that had gone lukewarm, and let my eyes wander up to the monitors like they always did. That was when I noticed movement on the camera labeled Archive 2, the second-floor archive section where students weren't allowed. On the grainy black and white feed, something dark slipped between 2 shelves, disappeared, then appeared again a little closer to the lens. The angle was terrible, so all I saw was a blurry shape cutting across the aisle. I stared at it, waiting for my brain to file it under weird shadows and move on. Instead, the shape moved again, then stopped. It didn't look like the usual HVAC flicker I'd gotten used to ignoring. Policy said that if we saw movement in a restricted area, we were supposed to check it and then call campus security if needed. I sat there for maybe 20 seconds, hoping it would just stop, then sighed, grabbed the flashlight from under the desk, clipped the master keys to my belt loop, and headed for the stairs. The archive section was always a little cut off from the rest of the building. Locked door, no windows, tall metal shelves and old bound journals no one touched anymore. I unlocked the service door, stepped inside, and hit the light switch. The fluorescent strips came on in pieces, 1 row at a time, until the aisles were washed in that flat, ugly light that leaves pockets of shadow no matter what you do. "Hello?" I called out, because the training said you announce yourself first in case someone's just lost. No answer, just the soft hum of the lights. I walked down the central aisle, sweeping the flashlight even though the overhead lights were on. I checked between shelves, looked for an open door, a backpack on the floor, anything that would explain the movement on the screen. Nothing. Everything looked exactly how it always looked. Dusty, cramped, boring. For a second I felt stupid for coming up alone instead of radioing security, but blowing off the camera would have been worse if it turned out there really was someone up here. I turned back toward the exit, already planning to tell security it was probably just a glitch. That was when I heard it. A quiet scraping sound somewhere behind me. Metal sliding against metal like someone nudging one of the rolling shelves. I froze. The sound came again. A short drag, and then a soft thud, further down the row. I spun around and saw the figure of a man in a dark hoodie standing between the shelves about 30 feet away. He wasn't moving. Head slightly down, hands at his sides, just standing there, watching me. The flashlight beam shook a little in my hand. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This area is closed. You need to leave." He didn't answer. He took 1 slow step forward, and that's when I saw his hands were clenched into fists. Something in my stomach dropped. All the boring slides from the mandatory safety workshop suddenly felt very real. Keep distance. Keep an exit behind you. Don't escalate. I started backing toward the stairwell door, 1 small step at a time, keeping my eyes on him and refusing to turn my back. "Okay," I said, forcing my voice not to shake. "I'm calling campus security." I pulled my phone out of my pocket, trying not to fumble it. The man suddenly lunged forward, breaking into a full sprint straight at me. Instinct took over. I turned and ran for the stairs, dialing security as I moved. I could hear his footsteps behind me and his heavy breathing getting closer, that rough, uneven kind of breath people have when they're running angry, not scared. The call to security was still ringing in my ear, but I didn't wait for anyone to pick up. I slammed my shoulder into the stairwell door, shoved it open, and took the steps down 2 at a time with one hand on the rail so I wouldn't wipe out. I kept waiting for that feeling of a hand grabbing the back of my hoodie. Instead, I just heard his shoes hammering on the concrete behind me. I yelled into the phone, not even sure if anyone was there. "Archive section, 2nd floor. There's a man up here. He chased me. Send someone now." And then I just focused on getting to the 1st floor. I burst out onto the main level and almost crashed into one of the study tables. Chairs scraped, pens rolled. The students closest to me stared like I'd lost it. I didn't bother explaining. I shouted, "Everyone out! Now!" way louder than I meant to. For a second, nobody moved. Then 3 of them, the ones sitting closest to the main aisle, jumped up, grabbed their bags without even closing them, and bolted for the front doors. One of the other 2 stammered, asking what was happening, but I just pointed and snapped, "Go! Just go!" That was enough. They followed the others at a run, shoes slapping on the floor, one of them looking back over his shoulder like he expected someone to be right behind him. As they took off, I grabbed the fire extinguisher off the wall and yanked it out of its bracket. It was heavier than I expected, and my hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. But I got a grip and hauled it in front of me like a shield. Every instinct I had was telling me to run with the students and get out too. But if he came straight down the stairs after them, there'd be no one between him and the exit, and no one to tell security which way he'd gone. So I moved a few steps back from the stairwell door, planted my feet, and held the extinguisher with both hands, finger close to the pin, eyes locked on the landing. He appeared there a second later, halfway down, and stopped. One hand on the railing, hood still up, just staring at me. We stood like that, both breathing hard, not saying anything. I finally managed, "Security is on the way. Don't come down here. It's over." My voice cracked, but I didn't move. He didn't answer. His chest was going up and down fast, and I saw his fists clench and unclench at his sides like he was arguing with himself. Somewhere outside, I caught the faint sound of sirens starting up, and that was the first moment it really hit me that someone might actually show up in time. I edged backward toward the front desk so I'd have more room to move if he rushed me. He watched me, then suddenly turned, spun around, and ran back up the stairs out of sight. I didn't chase him. I just stood there with the extinguisher raised, listening to doors thudding upstairs and my own heartbeat, until the front doors slammed open. 2 campus security officers came in fast, radios already in their hands. "Where is he?" one of them asked. "Upstairs, archives. He just ran," I said, pointing toward the stairwell, tripping over my words. They didn't wait for more. One took the stairs, the other cut down the side corridor toward the loading dock and back exit, talking into his radio as he went. I followed the one going down the corridor, staying back because I didn't want to be alone again. A few seconds later, I heard someone ahead shout, "Hey, stop!" And then the metal door to the dock slammed against the wall. When I reached the end of the hallway, they had him on the ground near the back exit, one officer on his shoulders, the other pulling his hands behind his back to cuff him while he kept yelling that he wasn't doing anything and that I'd exaggerated. They searched him right there, then took his wallet and pulled out a worn student ID. Later, in the security office, they told me he was a former student who'd been expelled 2 years earlier for assaulting a classmate in the dorms, and that he wasn't even allowed on campus anymore. He'd crawled through a ventilation shaft near the upstairs service hallway to get into the building earlier that evening, and had been hiding in the archive section for hours before I ever saw him on the camera. They found duct tape and a knife in his backpack when they went through it in front of me and the head of security, laid out on the desk in a neat line like evidence on a TV show. I still don't really know what he was planning, and nobody ever sat me down with a detailed explanation. But the campus psychologist I talked to once afterward said he was probably looking for victims among the girls who studied late at night, because we'd be tired, isolated, and less likely to make a scene. After that night, they did a full security overhaul. New cameras, alarms on the restricted doors, more patrols, and a rule that night shifts were always done in pairs so nobody would be stuck alone like I was. I finished college that spring and moved to another city, and I've turned down every job that mentions overnights or late shifts since. Any unexpected sound in a dark hallway or parking garage makes me flinch and check over my shoulder. And I catch myself locating exits the second I walk into a room without even thinking about it. The university mailed me a formal letter thanking me for my quick response under pressure and offering counseling. But I said I was fine and skipped it because I just wanted distance from all of it. Sometimes I wonder if he was specifically waiting for me that night, or if I was just the first person who wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. And I try not to think about what would have happened if security hadn't arrived so fast. So when I was 33, I'd been jogging in the evenings for 5 years already. Usually I'd head out around 7 after finishing work and run a route along the river in Denver, about 8 kilometers there and back. I'm a programmer, so most of my day is just me sitting in front of a screen, and running was the only thing that stopped my back from locking up completely. The route was popular. There were always lots of runners and cyclists, especially in summer. I liked that. Crowds meant it felt safe. No dark, empty corners where something stupid could happen. In late June on a Thursday, I went out for my run as usual. The weather was great, around 25 degrees, light breeze, sun still up, but not baking. I locked my apartment, did my normal little calf stretch on the stairs, headphones in, and started running from my house toward the river. First kilometer was through quiet streets. Same houses I'd passed 1,000 times. Same dog that always barked at me from 1 yard. Nothing strange. About a kilometer in, when I came out onto the embankment, I noticed a cyclist riding slowly several dozen meters behind me. Black bike, black gear, nothing special. I didn't pay much attention since there were always lots of cyclists there, and he wasn't doing anything odd yet. I settled into my usual pace and tried to clear my head of work stuff. I remembered thinking about a nasty bug I'd been fighting all day, running through possible fixes in my head. Every so often I'd glance sideways at the river, at other people on the path. After a while though, that cyclist stayed in the back of my mind. You know that feeling when you're aware of something behind you even if you're not looking? It was like that. Just a small pressure between my shoulder blades. After another kilometer, I stopped at a traffic light before a bridge. The path crossed a small road there, and the light for us was red. I slowed to a jog, then to a walk, catching my breath. The cyclist rolled up and stopped about 10 meters behind me. For the first time, I really looked at him. A man around 40 maybe, in dark glasses and black cycling gear, helmet, gloves, everything standard. Average height, average build, nothing that screamed problem. If you described him to someone, you'd have almost nothing specific to say. The light changed, and I ran on. I expected him to swing out and pass me right away, but he didn't. The cyclist followed but didn't pass me even though I was running at an average pace, and any cyclist could easily overtake. I could hear his tires behind me, the soft hum, always the same distance. I remembered some safety article about not ignoring weird patterns, so I started paying attention to him. I told myself I was overreacting, but I still watched his shadow and it slid long next to mine. A few minutes later, I deliberately slowed down, pretending to be tired. I even put my hands on my hips for a second like I was catching my breath. The cyclist also slowed down, staying at the same distance. No phone out, no obvious reason. I sped up and he sped up. Kept that 10, maybe 15-meter gap like it was on rails. My heart started pounding faster than it should have for that speed. This was weird, and now I couldn't explain it away. I decided to test my suspicions and sharply turned onto a side trail that led into a small park. I'd been on it before. It wound between some trees and playground equipment, then looped back to the river. The cyclist followed me. I heard the change in sound as his tires left the smooth path and hit the rougher asphalt. The trail was narrow, and cyclists don't usually ride on it because of kids and dogs. No one else turned with us. I ran faster, weaving between trees and benches, not full sprint but close. My shoes slapped harder than I liked. My breathing got loud in my own ears. Looking back, I saw he was still following me, even though riding a bike on this trail was awkward. He had to slow for tight corners, steer around a trash can, but he still stayed behind me, not losing ground, not calling out anything like "on your left." Panic was rising. Panic was not the dramatic movie kind, just this cold, clear thought. Okay, this is now definitely not normal. I cut the loop short, took the first turn that led back toward the embankment where there were more people. Kids' voices, someone's speaker playing music, distant traffic. I forced my pace down a little so I didn't look like I was fleeing something. I ran back out onto the embankment. A couple with a stroller passed, 2 teenagers on scooters, another runner. Seeing them calmed me just a bit. The cyclist appeared a few seconds later, bumping off the curb back onto the main path. He didn't veer off or pretend it was coincidence. He just corrected his line and settled at almost the same distance again. That was the point where I decided I needed to deal with it directly. Running around hoping he'd get bored wasn't working. I stopped and turned to face him, planting my feet, planning to ask why he was following me, and maybe film him if he did anything. My phone was in the belt pocket at my waist. I was already aware of the weight of it, but he just stopped about 15 meters away, silently staring at me through dark glasses. Didn't say a word, didn't come closer. I shouted, asking what he wanted, loud enough that a couple people turned their heads. He didn't answer, just stood there holding his bike handlebars. I saw a group of runners nearby, about 5 people moving in my direction. They were spread out across the path, talking, not pushing hard, the kind of pace where people are clearly not doing serious training. I didn't think it through for long. I just turned away from the cyclist, jogged straight toward them, and lifted my hand a little like I was trying to flag down a cab. One of them, a guy in a red shirt, slowed first and gave me that quick once-over people do when they're checking if you're hurt. "Hey, sorry," I said, more out of breath from nerves than from the run. "Can I run with you guys for a bit? That guy on the bike back there has been following me for like 15 minutes. I thumbed over my shoulder as I said it. Saying it out loud made me feel a little stupid, like I was some paranoid weirdo, but I didn't know how else to frame it. They all looked past me. The guy in red frowned. A woman in a gray tank squinted and asked, "Which one?" I turned too. The cyclist was still there on the path, facing us. But as soon as he saw me talking with the group, he pushed off, rolled forward a few meters, then did this slow U-turn and started riding the other direction, like he'd just remembered somewhere else he needed to be. He was closer, I said, hearing how defensive I sounded. Right behind me. He followed me into the park. He wouldn't pass or say anything. The guy in red shrugged, not like he didn't believe me, more like he just didn't know what to do with that information. "Yeah, that's weird," he said. "Run with us. Strength in numbers, right?" One of the others made a short, awkward laugh at that, but nobody argued. We fell into pace together. It felt strange to be in a tight little pack when I usually ran alone, but having other footsteps around me actually helped. Every couple of minutes I glanced back even though I'd watched the cyclist ride away. Each time, I only saw normal stuff. Other runners, some guy with a dog, an older couple walking. No black bike, no dark glasses. After a few minutes, I told them the whole story. How he'd matched my speed. How he'd followed me onto the side trail even though it was narrow. How he'd stopped when I stopped and just stared at me. One of the women muttered that it was creepy as hell. Another guy said maybe he'd just been zoning out and using me as a pacer. But even he admitted following into the park was off. When we got close to where my route usually ended, they offered to walk me home if I was worried. I didn't pretend to be fine. I said yes. We ran together for about 2 kilometers until we reached the turnoff toward my neighborhood. The group naturally slowed, and we shifted down to a walk. I kept looking back down the path. Every time, I half expected to see that black shape appear again in the distance, but the embankment behind us stayed normal. We reached my street, and they came with me all the way to my building. I thanked them probably 3 times each. I felt awkward and overly dramatic, but I honestly was relieved not to be alone. At the entrance, I turned around one more time, scanning the block, the intersection, the bit of river path I could still see between buildings. The cyclist wasn't visible. No bikes at all, just a delivery van and some parked cars. I went into my building entrance, let the door close behind me, and listened for a second to make sure no one tried to slip in after me. That evening, I couldn't calm down. I kept replaying the whole run in my head, trying to find a normal explanation that didn't make me feel like a target. I checked the locks on my door twice, then a 3rd time before bed. The next day, I still needed the exercise, but I forced myself to change the routine. I went for a run in the afternoon at 3, when there were even more people on the embankment, parents with strollers, students, office workers cutting through. I picked a slightly different route at first, then merged back onto the river path. I watched every cyclist more than usual, checked their clothes, their bikes, their faces, even though I knew the dark glasses would make it hard to be sure if it was him. The cyclist wasn't there. No one paid any special attention to me. I finished the run, walked home, and nothing happened. I never saw him again. Maybe it was a coincidence, and the guy was just riding the same route, zoning out, not even realizing I was reading all this intent into his movements. But his behavior, the silence, following me onto the side trail, stopping when I stopped, all of it still makes me think he was specifically following me. I never found out who he was or what he wanted. Now I only run during the day, and always with my phone that has location tracking enabled, and I share my live location if I'm going somewhere new. I told several of my runner friends about this incident, and it turned out one of my acquaintances had dealt with a similar situation a year ago. A cyclist in dark glasses had followed her, matching her pace and hanging back without speaking, but she couldn't identify him. Maybe it was the same person. About 3 years back, I rented a small house on the outskirts of town and lived alone. The houses out there all stood separate with their own small yards, so it was quiet most of the time. I worked remotely, so most days it was just me, my laptop on the kitchen table, and whatever podcast I had playing. The neighbors were polite, but distant. We waved, made small talk about the weather, then went back inside our own boxes. My favorite part of the house was the little veranda out front with an old rocking chair and a small table where the mailman left my stuff. Mail went into a metal box by the door, but bigger things got dropped right on the veranda. I got used to opening the door and finding Amazon boxes or the occasional package from my parents. One morning in June, I came back from a short run, sweaty and out of breath, reached the top step, and saw a plastic supermarket bag right in front of the door. It was tied in a tight knot. No store receipt taped to it, no delivery label. I didn't remember ordering anything that would come like that. I carried it inside anyway and set it on the table. For a second, I just looked at it, feeling stupid for hesitating over a grocery bag. Then I untied the knot. Inside were 3 gardening magazines and a small folded card. The magazines were brand new, glossy, all about small vegetable gardens and backyard beds. The handwriting on the card was neat and plain. "I hope you like it." No name, no return address, nothing that made it less weird. At first I told myself it had to be a mistake. Maybe some neighbor ordered them as a gift for someone else, and the delivery guy mixed up the houses. I checked the bag again for any scrap with an address, found nothing, and finally just put the magazines on the counter. The only thing that bothered me was how close they were to my own plans. I'd been Googling how to start a small garden on my back lot, saving pictures of raised beds. I hadn't told anyone yet. It was just something living in my browser tabs. I tried to forget about it. 4 days later, I went out to grab a grocery bag from my car and almost stepped on another supermarket bag on the veranda. Same store logo, same tight knot. This one was heavier. I already knew it was meant for me, and my stomach did this slow little drop. Inside were 10 neatly stacked seed packets: tomatoes, cucumbers, herbs, salad greens. Another card on top: "For your garden." Same handwriting. Still no name. Now it wasn't a delivery error. Somebody was doing this on purpose. I walked over to my neighbor on the right, an older woman who spent a lot of time working on her flowers. I held up one of the seed packets. "Hey, this is random, but did you maybe leave some gardening stuff on my porch and they mixed up the houses?" She shook her head right away. "No, sweetheart, not me," she said, then smiled. "Sounds like you've got a fan." I laughed it off, told her it was probably some promo thing, and went back home, but it nagged at me. That evening I went through my email and bank app, making sure I hadn't accidentally signed up for some subscription box or clicked on an ad. Nothing. I live alone. I don't talk to coworkers about my yard, and I hadn't posted about gardening anywhere online. Whoever was leaving this either guessed extremely well or knew more about what I was doing than made sense. About a week later, a third bag appeared. By then, I'd started glancing out at the veranda whenever I walked past the window, more out of habit than anything. It showed up mid-morning while I was between meetings. Same bag, same knot. Inside were gardening gloves in a size that fit me, a small hand trowel, and a bundle of little white plant markers. The card said, "Everything you need is already with you." That line flipped the feeling from odd to wrong. It read less like a gift and more like commentary on my life. Like the person writing it believed they understood me. The gloves and tool were exactly what I'd been planning to buy next, which just made my skin crawl. I hadn't bought anything yet. Those plans existed only in my head and in a couple of saved links. After that, I couldn't leave the house without scanning the street. When I stepped onto the veranda, I'd look at the parked cars, checking if anyone was sitting inside, at the closed curtains across from me. Nothing jumped out. Nobody stared. The street looked normal, but it didn't feel normal anymore. I started locking the door even if I was just taking the trash out. I also started checking the veranda constantly, opening the door or peeking through the front window every hour to see if anything new had shown up. One afternoon, that habit was the only reason I saw anything. I happened to walk past the front window and caught movement on the path. A person in a hoodie walking quickly up to my veranda, hood up, head down, one hand gripping a plastic bag against their leg. My heart jumped into my throat as I stepped back from the glass, then edged forward just enough to see them pause at the top of the steps, turn toward my door, and set another bag down. I reacted without thinking. I yanked the door open and ran onto the veranda, but by the time I cleared it, the person was already turning the corner of the house. I shouted, "Hey!" and sprinted after them, rounded the corner, and saw only the empty sidewalk and few parked cars. No doors, no footsteps. Whoever it was had moved faster than I could react. I stood there for a moment, feeling stupid, then went back to the veranda and picked up the new bag. Hands were shaking. Inside were garden decorations, 2 little gnomes, some solar lights, artificial flowers. The card on top said, "Soon you will start." No name, same careful handwriting. It felt less like a present and more like instructions. All afternoon I went back and forth about calling the police. On paper, nothing bad was happening. Someone was dropping off gifts. But the fact that they knew my plans, when I'd never talked about them out loud, made skin crawl. I even dialed the non-emergency number and hung up before it rang, already hearing them say there was nothing to report yet, except maybe install a camera. So I bought one. The next morning I picked up a wireless camera, mounted it above the veranda and pointed it straight at the steps and door. I tested it a couple times, watching myself appear on the phone screen. Having the camera running didn't make me relax, but at least I knew there would be video if they came back. 3 days went by with nothing. On the 4th day, my phone buzzed during a meeting. Motion detected. I muted my mic, opened the app, and watched the live feed. A figure in dark clothes, hood up, walked into frame, kept their head down, climbed the steps, put a bag by my door, paused for maybe a second, then turned and left. No face, no details, just roughly my height and ordinary sneakers. I waited until they were gone from the frame, then went to the door, checked the peephole, and grabbed the bag. Inside were no more tools or decorations, only folded sheets of printer paper. Each one had a single line typed in, "You will be happy. The garden will change everything. I will help you." Nothing about it was technically a threat, but the tone felt pushy and possessive, like they'd already decided what my life should look like. At that point, my lease had about 2 months left. Until then, I'd planned to stay and decide later, but reading those notes killed that plan in one afternoon. I pictured this person sitting in a parked car or watching from a window, waiting for me to start, like they'd written. The idea of planting anything there, using their gifts, made me sick. I stuffed every gnome, light, packet, and note back into the bags, tied them tight, and shoved them into the back of a closet. That night I opened listings and started looking for anywhere else. Within a week, I found small apartment, signed the lease, and gave notice to my landlord. When he asked why I was leaving early, I said I needed to be closer to the city for work. It was true, just not the whole reason. I didn't mention the packages or the camera. I didn't want to hear someone else say it out loud. After I moved, everything stopped. I never learned who it was. The mix of secrecy and control scared me more than any open threat. Maybe a neighbor, maybe someone online watching me quietly somewhere. In early August last year, I was working as a designer at a small ad agency in the Austin suburbs. I was 25, doing mostly social media graphics and banner ads, the usual boring stuff. Our office was a converted warehouse with an open floor plan, 10 of us sharing a bunch of desks pushed together. You could hear everything: keyboard tapping, Slack pings, someone's Spotify playlist bleeding through bad headphones. The week Brad started, our supervisor did the quick intro thing, said he was our new project manager, and everyone gave that polite half smile, half wave before going back to work. Brad looked about 30, average build, short brown hair, plain button-down shirt. First day he had a wedding ring, next day it was gone. He spoke quietly, only when needed, and always kept his eyes on the floor or the screen. At first, I just figured he was awkward. I'm not exactly Miss Social either, so I didn't judge. The only real interaction we had that first week was him asking where the brand assets were saved. His voice was flat, like he was exhausted. I pointed him to the server. He mumbled thanks, end of conversation. But around midweek, I started getting that weird, heavy feeling on the side of my face, like someone was staring at me. I'd be deep in a layout, zoomed in at 300%, and suddenly feel it. I'd look up and catch Brad looking straight at me, not casually glancing around, but just locked in. No smile, no expression, just staring. The second our eyes met, he'd whip his head back to his monitor. No joke, no, "Oh, sorry," zoned out. Just that quick, guilty movement. I told myself I was being dramatic. People look around when they think. But it kept happening. I'd be talking to my friend and coworker Sarah about some client, and I'd see him turn just slightly in his chair, eyes on me, like he was listening only to what I was saying. By Friday, I saw him again, this time in the reflection of the conference room glass while I was presenting a mock-up. He wasn't even in the meeting. He was at his desk behind me, staring at my reflection like the rest of the room didn't exist. I lost my sentence mid-pitch and had to fake a cough to reset. That evening while we were packing up, I finally said something to Sarah. I asked, "Do you get any kind of weird vibe from Brad, or is that just me?" She rolled over in her chair and said she thought he was just shy, then asked why. I told her, "He looks at me a lot. Like, a lot. She frowned a little at that and said she'd start paying attention, but told me not to freak myself out yet. New managers, new environment, people get weird for a bit. I tried to believe her and went home. After 2 weeks, the weird stuff escalated. One Monday I came in, dropped my bag, and there was a piece of paper placed right in the middle of my tablet. It was a printed screenshot of my Instagram profile. My face, the grid, my handle, everything. We weren't the kind of office that did pranks, and nobody said anything when I walked in. No one was even looking at me. I folded the paper and stuck it in my drawer, trying to act normal. The next day, there was a photo instead. A glossy print of my car in the back lot, same space I always park in, taken from a couple rows over. No note, no writing on the back, just my car. My hands shook a little when I picked it up. I went to our supervisor Jason and casually asked if there were any new security checks or something. He looked confused and said no, then asked why. I just said I'd found something weird on my desk, but maybe it was nothing, and backed out before he asked more questions. By Wednesday morning, a folded receipt from the cafe where I grabbed breakfast on the way to work was sitting on my keyboard. Same place, same drink, same sandwich, and the timestamp was from that morning. My name wasn't on it, but it was exactly my order. That's when the "it's just a joke" story in my head kind of snapped. At lunch, I pulled Sarah outside and showed her everything. The screenshot, the car photo, the receipt. Her face changed immediately. She said, "Okay, that's not funny. That's creepy." She told me she'd watch my desk when I wasn't there, and that I should start keeping everything in case we needed proof. The next day, while I was in a meeting, Sarah texted me, "Brad is at your desk. Been there like 5 minutes, looking at your stuff." When I came out, he was back at his own computer like nothing had happened. Sarah later whispered that he'd just stood there, looking over everything. My pens, my sketchbook, little personal things, like he was studying them. He only moved when another coworker walked by. That was the point where I stopped giving him the benefit of the doubt. I told Sarah I was going to talk to Jason the next day. But that same evening I got the first message. I was on my couch after dinner, scrolling through my email on my phone, when a new message popped up from some address that was just random letters and numbers. No name. Subject line just said, "Hi." The body was short. He said he liked how I worked, how I looked when I was focused, that we had a connection and should be together. No signature, but he mentioned the color of my shirt from that day, and a specific joke I'd made in the morning meeting. My stomach dropped. I screenshotted it and sent it to Sarah with, "This has to be him, right?" She called me right away and said we were going straight to Jason in the morning. I barely slept that night. I kept every light on, sat in bed with my laptop open, jumping at every car door outside. The next day we went to Jason as soon as Brad sat down at his desk. Sarah explained what she'd seen. I showed Jason the folder with the printed photos, the receipt, and the email. Jason's face got tight. He asked if anything had happened outside of work. I said no, just this stuff. He said he had to take it seriously and was going to speak to Brad immediately, and asked if I wanted HR involved yet. I told him I wanted it documented and for it to stop. That was it. Jason called Brad into a small meeting room and then waved us in a minute later. Jason laid everything out again for the record, then asked Brad if he'd been at my desk or left anything on it. Brad kept his eyes on Jason, not on me, and said no. He said maybe someone was trying to sabotage him because he was new. When Jason brought up the email, Brad said he didn't know anything about it, that he didn't even have my personal address. His voice stayed calm, but his hands were tensed on the table, fingers pressed together hard. Jason told him that any harassment, inside or outside the office, would mean termination and probably HR and police. Brad nodded, said he understood, repeated that he'd done nothing. We were dismissed. Jason said he'd written everything down and to tell him immediately if anything else happened. I walked out of that room feeling shaky and weirdly exposed, like I'd admitted to something embarrassing instead of reporting a problem. The rest of the afternoon I couldn't concentrate. Every time Brad shifted in his chair, I felt my shoulders tighten. No one else knew what was going on except Sarah and Jason, but the air in the room felt different. Around 4, I went to Jason's desk and told him I wasn't feeling well and asked if I could leave early. He just nodded and told me to go home and text him if anything else came up. In the parking lot, I sat in my car with the engine off, phone in my hand, thinking about going back to my apartment with that email still sitting in my inbox. I realized I didn't feel safe there by myself, not with him somewhere in the same city, pretending none of this was happening. I called my mom and told her work had stressed me out and asked if I could crash with them. She said yes immediately, asked if I was okay, and I told her I'd explain when I got there. I pulled out of the lot, got on the highway toward their neighborhood in the next district over, and drove to my parents' house because I didn't want to be home alone. The next day when I got home around 6, I noticed my front door lock looked wrong, scratched and fresh. Up close, there were thin new scratches around the keyhole, like someone had dragged metal across it repeatedly that day. I unlocked the door anyway, walked through every room, and saw nothing missing. But it felt like someone watched recently. I stepped back into the hallway, shut the door, and called the non-emergency police line because it felt targeted already. The officer who arrived looked tired but serious, checked the lock, and said the marks were definitely fresh today there. He asked about roommates, exes, angry neighbors, anybody with a key, so I told him about Brad immediately and everything. He wrote everything down, said it sounded serious, told me to change the lock, install a camera, stay cautious tonight. I called a locksmith right away, booked the earliest slot, then packed a bag to sleep at my parents' again. After he changed the lock, I set up a cheap door camera, then lay awake checking notifications instead of sleeping. The next morning I dragged myself into work because staying home felt worse, and Brad's chair was strangely empty suddenly. Sarah rolled over to my desk and whispered that he hadn't checked in, wasn't online, and wasn't answering calls anywhere. Around lunch I remembered my personal laptop was still in the car, so I grabbed my keys and headed outside. From a distance everything looked normal, but when I reached my car I saw paper tucked carefully under the wiper. I pulled it free, unfolded it, and realized it was a printed photo of my apartment door from yesterday evening. You see me unlocking the door, bag on shoulder, and on the back it said, "I know where you live." My hands started shaking so badly I had to lean on the hood, because this proved he'd followed me home. I shoved the photo into my bag, went straight back inside, told Sarah, and then called the police from work. The dispatcher sounded focused, said officers were on the way, and told me to stay inside and avoid confronting anyone. Jason pulled me and Sarah into a conference room, phoned HR, tried calling Brad, and waited there until officers arrived. They photographed everything, bagged the papers, had me forward the emails, and asked direct questions about any contact outside work. When I answered no to touching or threats or flirting, one officer said this was stalking and they'd open charges. They asked Jason for Brad's full file, emergency contacts, address, everything, then left while we sat pretending to keep working. Hours later, Jason's phone rang, and after talking quietly in his office, he called me and Sarah in again there. He said police had found copies of my schedule, pages with my name highlighted, and multiple photos of my building. They'd also discovered a small set of lockpicks, and Brad had admitted following me but claimed he meant nothing harmful. Jason repeated that Brad told them he thought this was a romantic movie moment where I'd eventually realize we belonged. Brad was arrested for stalking and attempted illegal entry, and HR told me he'd done similar at his last job. Apparently there'd been a complaint from another woman, but he was fired before court, and the case collapsed on technicalities. Knowing that didn't make me feel safer. I spent a month jumping whenever doors opened before handing in my resignation. Now I work remotely as a designer, keep my information locked down, and treat every strange feeling as a warning. The white folding cane I bought for a neurology seminar probably saved my life that day. I was standing in a mall corridor pretending to be blind, tapping the ground with that cane while an elderly couple watched me from about 20 feet away, trying to figure out if I was the same girl they'd been following for the past half hour. I'm 23, a med student, and up until that weekend the scariest thing in my life had been exams, not people. 2 months earlier, I'd traveled to Portland for a medical conference and decided to stay the weekend. I didn't know anyone there, so I figured I'd do exactly what our professors always told us not to do and relax a little. After a morning neurology lecture, I walked to a big shopping complex downtown around 3 in the afternoon. It was crowded but normal. Families, teenagers, office workers. I remember thinking it felt weirdly safe compared to the bus stop near my own campus. I was looking at electronics when I first noticed them. A woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back, and a man slightly older wearing glasses, both in beige jackets. They were standing against the opposite wall staring directly at me. At first, I assumed they were looking past me, maybe at a TV behind me or some sale sign. I moved a few steps to the side. Their eyes tracked me. It wasn't just one look either. I'd glance at a set of headphones, look up again, and they'd still be there. Not talking, not browsing, just watching. It felt like when standardized patients stare too hard during an exam, waiting for you to mess up, except these two weren't playing a role for my grade. I told myself they were probably lost or foreign tourists trying to read the aisle signs and pushed it out of my mind. After 10 minutes of pretending it wasn't happening, I moved to the clothing section thinking maybe I was imagining things. I cut through 2 other departments and took my time, making random stops at racks I didn't care about. 5 minutes later, they appeared there too, keeping about 30 feet back. The woman was whispering to the man and nodding toward me like I was an item on a list. My stomach dropped. The man took out his phone and pretended to talk, but from where I was, I could see the screen wasn't lit. He wasn't even holding it right, just kind of pressed against his cheek. I tested my theory the way we test reflexes in lab. Quick, simple, undeniable. I headed fast toward the 2nd floor exit, not running but walking like I suddenly remembered being late. When I looked back from the escalator they were following, weaving around people, walking faster now. My heart started pounding. There was that cold, clinical part of my brain trying to label what was happening. Possible mistaken identity. Maybe they were loss prevention. but the rest of me just felt like prey. I stepped off the escalator and went into a bookstore, the kind with high shelves you can hide behind. I pretended to browse travel guides while watching them through the gaps in the books. They positioned themselves at the entrance and waited. They weren't even pretending to shop now. The woman was holding a large cloth bag that I hadn't seen before, twisted around her hand like she needed something to grab quickly. The man stood half turned toward the hallway, half toward the store, like he wanted to watch both at once. When I moved toward the other exit at the back, they immediately followed, keeping that same distance. I left the bookstore and walked out into the corridor heading for the elevators, and they stayed about 15 steps behind. I could see their reflection in the dark window glass every time I passed a closed store. That's when the woman called out, asking me to wait. Her voice was bright, almost friendly, which somehow made it worse. I sped up, pretending not to hear, acting like a distracted student glued to her phone. They were almost running now. Their footsteps changed behind me, faster, uneven. The man said louder that I'd dropped my wallet. I knew I hadn't dropped anything because my wallet was zipped inside my backpack under my arm, and I hadn't opened it since the electronics section. Every safety lecture we'd had about distraction scams flashed through my head all at once. The elevator was occupied. I pressed the button anyway, and saw the little light already glowing. There were people inside, and the doors were slowly closing, and I realized if I tried to force my way in, I'd just trap myself with strangers, and maybe them too. Stairs were further behind me, closer to them than to me. I was running out of options, and could feel my hands shaking around the backpack straps. Then I remembered the white cane in my bag. I'd bought it that morning at a medical equipment sale in the conference lobby for our rehabilitation seminars, where we practiced guiding visually impaired patients. It had felt like overkill at the time, a nerdy souvenir. Now it felt like equipment in a trauma bay. Maybe the one thing between me and something I didn't even want to name. I veered toward a small alcove by a vending machine, swung my backpack around to my chest, and unzipped it. My fingers fumbled on the zipper because I didn't want to stop walking completely. I made it look like I was just digging for my phone. I could hear the couple closing in, the man repeating about the wallet, his voice getting tighter like he was irritated I wasn't taking the bait. My hand hit the smooth plastic handle. I pulled the cane out, unfolded it with those quick little snaps, and grabbed my dark sunglasses from the side pocket where I kept them for migraines. I slipped them on, took one breath to steady myself, then stepped back out into the main corridor. I forced my shoulders to relax, lowered my chin slightly, and started walking slowly, tapping the cane on the floor and letting it lightly brush the baseboards as I passed. I made my movements uncertain like someone with serious vision problems. I headed back toward the bookstore area acting like I was lost, slowing my walk and letting the cane tap in front of me. The couple stopped about 50 feet away. I kept my face turned slightly past them and watched in the edge of my vision. Over the mall noise, I heard the woman, sounding annoyed, say I was blind, and they had made a mistake, that this was someone else. Then she said, very plainly, that they should have grabbed me from the parking lot. Hearing that word made it obvious this was not simple paranoia. I kept the act going. I walked slowly with the cane ahead of me, stopped every few steps like I was listening, and touched the wall once with my free hand the way we had practiced in rehab class. Inside, I felt like I was going to throw up, but I focused on keeping my shoulders loose and my steps uneven. If they believed I could not see them or hear them well, that was my only leverage. After a minute, I heard them turn away and their footsteps faded into the general noise, but I did not speed up. I stayed in character for another 10 minutes, looping once near the bookstore, then drifting toward a different corridor in that same hesitant way. Whenever I passed glass, I used the reflection to check behind me without turning my head. I did not see them again, but I still assumed they might be somewhere out of frame, When I finally found another escalator, I felt for the handrail with the cane and rode it down to the first floor. It was crowded there, which helped. I moved toward the main entrance where I remembered seeing security guards earlier, still tapping the cane and acting like I was following sound. Only when I heard radio chatter close by did I step out of the flow of people, lower the cane, fold it with stiff fingers, and pull off the sunglasses. My hands were shaking hard enough that I almost dropped it. I went straight to the information desk and told the woman I needed mall security. My voice came out thin and shaky, but she did not argue, just picked up the phone. A guard arrived and led me into a small office behind the desk. With the door closed and the camera feeds pulled up on a monitor, I went through everything. Where I had first seen the couple, how long they had stayed near me, the fake phone call, the bag, the comment about grabbing me. He listened without interrupting, then rewound footage. On one screen we saw me in electronics and the couple across from me, staring. On another we saw them in clothing, hanging back when I moved. He checked the timestamps and said they had followed me for just over 30 minutes. Then he switched to the parking garage view and showed them walking out a side door, getting into an old green sedan, and driving away about 15 minutes before I reached the desk. The car showed up clearly. The plates were just a blur. While he filled out an incident report, he said this was not the first complaint like this. In the past few months, they had gotten more reports about elderly couples watching young women in the mall and in the parking lots. He told me that in other cities, couples like that had later been tied to a bigger group involved in kidnapping, and that using older people made everyone less suspicious. After that, he radioed another guard, and they both walked me back to my hotel. One stayed slightly ahead, one slightly behind, and even with them there, I kept scanning every car and doorway. At the lobby, they had me speak to the front desk, so there would be a record that mall security had escorted me. Then they left, and I went straight to my room, locked the door, and shoved a chair under the handle. For the rest of the trip, I refused to go anywhere alone. I asked classmates to walk with me, skipped every social event, sat near exits during lectures, and kept that white cane in my backpack where I could get to it in one motion. The whole thing drilled into me that danger does not always look like some obvious villain, and that boring medical drills can end up being the only thing between you and a story with a very different ending. If it had not been for that training cane in my bag and the habits from school, I honestly do not know how that day in the mall would have ended. I work from home most days and rent an apartment on the second floor of a 3-story building downtown. I'm 27, a graphic designer, and my routine is strict in a way I like. Office on Mondays and Thursdays, working from home the rest of the week. That Thursday, I stayed late at the office finishing a client project my boss hovered over, and by the time I grabbed a rideshare and got home, it was just after 11. In the stairwell, I heard loud music pounding from the 3rd floor, and remembered my upstairs neighbor Sarah lived up there, so I assumed she was having people over or getting ready to go out. Inside my apartment, I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and was heading to the kitchen when I heard fast footsteps coming down from the 3rd floor, so I checked the peephole and saw a man in a dark jacket walking quickly past my door. I only caught his profile: average height, dark hair, hands in his pockets, head down like he didn't want eye contact, and nothing about him screamed danger, so I just assumed he was one of Sarah's guests leaving early and went back to my laptop. About 10 minutes later, the music cut off in the middle of a song like someone had yanked the plug, and maybe half a minute after that, a single heavy crash shook the ceiling. Then everything went completely silent in a way that instantly made me sit up. I texted Sarah through Messenger. "Everything okay?" Heard a loud crash. Watched it stay stuck on delivered, then called her. And as it rang, I heard her ringtone faintly through my ceiling with no footsteps or movement, then listened to it go to voicemail twice without anyone picking up. I don't usually jump straight to worst-case scenarios, but the mix of loud music, that crash, and her phone ringing in what sounded like an empty apartment felt wrong enough that I grabbed my jacket and keys, put my shoes back on, and headed up to the third floor. The hallway was empty, but light showed around Sarah's door, and as I got closer, I saw it was standing slightly open, even though our doors usually lock shut. So I stopped, listened to the silence, knocked, called. "Sarah, it's Lauren from downstairs," and finally pushed the door wider. Stepping inside, I saw her living room trashed, the coffee table on its side, a broken vase and water across the floor, and on the hardwood dark smears and drops leading toward the couch that I finally realized were blood. Sarah was lying on her side near the base of the couch, hair over her face, one arm twisted underneath her, and there was a dark, wet patch around her head that made my stomach drop in a way I don't think I'll ever forget. I dropped to my knees beside her, called her name, pressed my fingers to the side of her neck until I found a weak, fast pulse, then grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and told the dispatcher my neighbor was unconscious and bleeding in what looked like a ransacked apartment. The dispatcher kept me on the line, asked if she was breathing and if I saw any weapons, then told me to put pressure on the wound with something clean, so I grabbed a towel from a nearby chair and pressed it firmly against the side of Sarah's head. Sarah made a small noise in her throat. Her eyelids fluttered for a second and rolled back, and I kept pressure on the towel, repeating, "You're okay, just stay with me," while I knelt on the hard floor listening for sirens. Into the phone, I haltingly explained about the loud music earlier, the abrupt silence and crash, and how I'd found Sarah on the floor, trying to give the dispatcher everything I could remember while I stayed there holding the towel and waiting for the ambulance and police to arrive. Footsteps sounded in the hallway outside, slow and heavy, stopping at the open door, and when I finally looked up, the same man in the dark jacket was just standing there watching us. "What are you doing here?" he asked aggressively. In that second, it hit me that he wasn't just some random neighbor. He was the one who had flipped the table and left Sarah bleeding on the floor. He looked from me to her and back again like he was deciding how much time he had. "I called the police. They're already on their way," I said. That was a lie, but I made my voice sound steady and kept my hand on the towel at her head. For a moment, he just stared at us, jaw tight, and I remember thinking if he stepped inside, I would have to fight him. I shifted my weight a little, ready to grab my phone and swing it if I had to. Instead, he swore under his breath, spun around, and ran down the hallway. A second later, I heard the stairwell door slam. I stayed on my knees next to Sarah, too afraid to leave her to go close the door. The dispatcher was still in my ear, asking if he was gone, and telling me officers and paramedics were almost there. About 5 minutes later, I heard boots on the stairs and voices in the hall. 2 EMTs and 2 police officers came through Sarah's open doorway. The EMTs went straight to her, and one of the officers gently pulled me back so they could work and led me a few steps into the hall. While they checked her breathing and put a collar around her neck, the officer asked if I knew the man, what he looked like, and how long ago he had left. They took Sarah out on a stretcher and told me she had a serious head injury, but was breathing on her own. Later, I found out it was a concussion and a skull fracture. She went into surgery and didn't wake up afterward. For a full week, I kept replaying the crash and his face in the doorway every time my phone buzzed. After that week, the detective called to say Sarah had finally woken up. I went back to the station to go over my statement again. He told me that when Sarah was clear enough to talk, she said the man was her ex-boyfriend. He had been calling and texting all week, asking her to meet so they could talk, and she kept saying no. That night he showed up drunk, pounded on her door, and when she told him to leave, he kicked the lock until it gave and forced his way in. They arrested him 3 days later using the security cameras from the building entrance in the street. The detective showed me a still image, and it was the same dark jacket and the same face I had seen through my peephole and in Sarah's doorway. During interrogation, he told them he had planned to come back up and, in his words, take care of the witness if anyone had seen him. He said he ran when he heard me say the police were already on the way, because he thought they might be outside. Hearing the detective repeat that, knowing he had been seconds from walking farther into that apartment, made my legs feel like they might give out. They arranged extra patrols past my building while the case went forward and gave me an officer's direct number to call if anything felt off. I kept my door double locked, stopped wearing headphones at home, and lay awake half the night listening for footsteps in the hall. 2 months later, I broke my lease and moved to a different neighborhood. I lost money on it, but I couldn't keep walking past that stairwell or hearing his footsteps in my head every time I hit the second floor. In the new place, I still pause when neighbors blast music, and if I hear a crash on the other side of the wall, I freeze until I hear someone laugh or talk. Sarah recovered physically and doesn't live alone anymore. As soon as she was strong enough, she moved to stay with her family in another state. We text sometimes about work or random stuff, but we don't talk about that night. I think we both know exactly what we're not saying. I still catch myself wondering what would have happened if I hadn't been working late that day, or if I'd decided it was none of my business and turned up the TV. I'm glad I trusted my gut and went upstairs and that she's still alive, but I also wish none of it had ever happened, because now every time music cuts off suddenly in my building, I stop and listen, just to make sure there isn't someone else lying on the floor waiting for help. Last summer, me and 3 of my friends, Liza, Tom, and Kevin, went to a 3-day indie music festival in the mountains on the Oregon-California border. We had studied together at music college, but now lived in different cities, so the festival was our excuse to reconnect. I am 26 now and work as a school music teacher, so 3 days away felt almost illegal to me. We arrived Friday afternoon after a long, boring drive, checked in at the gate, and walked into the clearing of tents. There were 3 small stages, a food and drink area, and maybe 200 marked tent spots spread across the grass. By then, around 150 people were already there, setting up tents, sitting on blankets, wandering between stages happily. We chose a spot near the trees, close to the main stage, and the guys immediately argued over the tent instructions. I walked to the food area for water and snacks, and noticed staff with radios everywhere, which actually made me relax. That first evening we watched an indie band, drank cheap beer, met people from Portland and Sacramento, and everything felt straightforward. Saturday was similar. Music, food, conversations, plus an organizer visiting our tent to remind everyone the headliner started at 2 sharp. Sunday morning we woke up around 9, sweating in the tent, heads pounding a little but still in decent moods overall. The plan was to grab coffee, maybe catch an early acoustic set, then camp out by the main stage before 2. Tom reminded us about the waterfall the local volunteers had mentioned, supposedly only about 2 kilometers away on a marked trail. We went back and forth for a few minutes, but eventually everyone agreed it would be stupid not to go today. We packed 2 backpacks with water, a few sandwiches, fruit, and towels, then headed off toward the trailhead near parking area. A simple printed sign saying waterfall 2 kilometers pointed into dense forest, and soon we were walking single file in silence. We talked about work and old classmates, but I kept checking my phone, counting minutes so we would not be late. After about an hour, we reached the waterfall, small but pretty, with a shallow pool and another festival couple already there. We swam in the freezing water, lay on the rocks to warm up, ate, and took too many stupid photos there. Around noon, Tom checked the time and said we should head back if we wanted good spots for the headliner later. The hike back felt quicker, maybe because we were watching the clock and I thought I heard faint bass behind us. When we stepped out of the trees into the clearing, something felt off, though it took a moment to register properly. All the tents were still standing, including ours, the stages and food trucks untouched. But there was not a single person. We walked forward slowly, looking around. Liza joked it was performance art, but nobody laughed, and the organizers' cars sat there. It did not look like anyone had packed up, so we started checking rows of tents, calling out as we walked. In one tent I saw unzipped sleeping bags, clothes piled everywhere, a phone charging on a battery pack, and a wallet. Another had a pair of shoes half pulled on beside the door, as if someone had been interrupted getting dressed suddenly. Near the main stage we found a folding table with half-drunk coffees and a tablet showing today's schedule and clock. The time in the corner was a little after 2. Nobody on stage, nobody even near it when we shouted again. Tom pulled out his phone and called one of the organizers whose number he had saved from buying merch on Saturday. It just rang and went to voicemail. He tried again with the same result, and the empty field suddenly felt dangerous. Kevin said, very quietly for him, that this was not normal at all and we needed to call police about it. Tom dialed the local police station on speaker, and when a woman answered, I tried to explain everything we saw there. Police showed up about 40 minutes later. 2 officers in a patrol SUV and an older man in a tan shirt who introduced himself as the county sheriff. Seeing the empty field with all the tents still up wiped the relaxed look off his face. They had us wait by the food area while they did an initial sweep, walking the rows of tents, calling out, checking behind the stages. After 10 minutes of that, the sheriff came back and asked us again if we were sure we had seen people here that morning. We told him about the bands, the volunteers, the couple at the waterfall, the reminder about the 2 o'clock show. He kept looking past us at the main stage like he still expected someone to wander back any second. Once they realized nobody was going to appear, they switched into full procedure mode. One officer stayed with us, taking our basic information and holding on to our IDs, while the sheriff and the other officer checked the forest edge around the clearing, following the first parts of the trails. Radio traffic started going back and forth, short clipped messages we couldn't follow. Within an hour, 2 more patrol cars rolled in, then a search and rescue truck with orange vests and gear. They fanned out into the woods in small groups, calling, blowing whistles, coming back more annoyed each time. From where we sat, all we saw were uniforms disappearing into the trees and coming back shaking their heads. What made it worse was all the personal stuff left behind. The officers started taking photos and writing numbers on tags, but there was no way to tag everything. There was just too much. Phones were still plugged into portable chargers inside open tents. Wallets sat on top of backpacks. Coolers stood open with ice half melted. A stroller was parked near one of the RV's car keys hung from lanyards tied to tent poles. Someone's half-eaten lunch sat on a paper plate by the second stage. There were no tracks that suggested a rush into the forest, no drag marks, no blood, nothing broken, nothing that looked like a fight. It really did look like everyone had stepped away for a minute and just never stepped back. By late afternoon, the mood shifted from confused to formally serious. A white, unmarked SUV rolled up, and plainclothes investigators got out, one saying he was from a regional missing persons unit, another mentioning federal assistance. The sheriff briefed them by the food trucks while we sat on a bench and watched them unfold maps, marking the stages, the parking rows, the trails leading out. Close to evening, a helicopter came, circling the clearing and the tree line again and again. From the ground, nothing changed. They separated us for full interviews at folding tables, keeping our phones in front of them and asking for passwords. I told the story over and over, Friday to Sunday, down to what we ate. They checked our timelines against each other and against card receipts. One investigator finally said, almost to himself, that around 150 people were unaccounted for. We were allowed to leave the next day after questioning and a walk of the grounds. The case blew up, but nothing changed. Cars and tents collected by families. No notes, no damage, tests, wild theories. I still dream about that empty camp, the coffee cups and charging phones. We talk sometimes, but never go to festivals. Whatever happened to everyone else passed through while we were at the waterfall. This started around 6 months back. I first noticed him at the grocery store on a Thursday evening after work. I was grabbing a quick dinner and some basics. Tall guy in a dark jacket stood in the next aisle, cart empty, looking my way instead of at the shelves. I moved to another aisle. A minute later, he came down that one too, still without picking anything up. It was small, but it felt wrong. I rushed through the rest of my list, went straight to self-checkout, and paid without looking around. I only relaxed once I was in my car with the doors locked. A fast glance at the entrance showed nothing useful, just people coming and going. I told myself I was being dramatic and drove home. The next day, Friday at lunch, I walked to a cafe 3 blocks from my office like I always did. As soon as I stepped inside and looked toward the tables, my stomach dropped. He was there again. Same jacket on the back of his chair, laptop open, coffee in front of him, When I came in, his eyes went straight to me and stayed there. I ordered anyway, sat where I could see both him and the door, forced myself to eat, and left early, spending the rest of the afternoon pretending this was just a strange coincidence. On Saturday, I tried to be logical and drove to a mall on the other side of town to buy a birthday gift for a friend. Different neighborhood, long drive, completely new crowd. I walked around for about an hour, then stepped out of a cosmetics store into the central atrium and saw him standing by the fountain. Same jacket, alone, pretending to scroll his phone, not moving with the flow of people. When I walked past, his head turned and his eyes followed me the whole way. 3 days, 3 places, same man. My heart started racing. I turned right back into the store. I went up to the sales clerk and quietly asked if there was a back exit. I told her a man had shown up near me 3 days in a row, and he was outside right then. She didn't question me. She glanced toward the front, saw him, and her face went serious. She called mall security and kept me near the back. A big guard arrived, had me point the man out from inside the doorway, then walked me through an employee corridor and out a service exit near the parking lot. We came out close to my car. He waited while I unlocked it and got in, only leaving once the doors were locked and the engine was on. I sat in the space for 10 minutes watching my mirrors, expecting that jacket between cars. He never appeared. Eventually I drove home, checking the rear view constantly, but not seeing anyone follow. Back at my apartment, I went straight across the hall to my neighbor Jennifer. We're about the same age and she works from home, so she notices everyone in our building. I told her everything from the grocery store to the mall and the security guard. She listened without interrupting, then said I should call the police and at least get it on record in case he escalated or someone else reported him. Hearing her say escalated out loud made my hands shake again. But I called. 2 officers came that evening and sat at my kitchen table. I gave them his description. Tall, average build, dark jacket, dark hair, maybe mid-30s, always alone. I explained that he'd never spoken to me or touched me, just kept showing up where I was. They said I'd done the right thing by calling, but that without direct threats or contact, there wasn't much they could do besides log the report and maybe patrol the area more. They told me to call 911 immediately if I saw him again and felt unsafe. After they left, I carried my phone from room to room like it was a lifeline. Over the next week, I changed my routines as much as I could. Different grocery store, different cafe, different routes, different parking spots at work, slightly different hours. I told my boss only that I was dealing with some guy issues and needed flexibility. She didn't press for details. For a few days, I didn't see him anywhere and started to think maybe he'd moved on. Then on Tuesday, I stayed late finishing a report. Most of the office had cleared out. When I finally shut down my computer, it was around 7. I took the elevator down to the parking level, stepped out, and saw the familiar dark jacket by the coffee vending machine near my usual section. He wasn't buying anything, just standing there with his hands in his pockets, turned toward the part of the lot where I normally parked. Every hair on my arms went up. I hit the elevator button again and went straight back upstairs. There were still a few coworkers around. I went to Travis, a programmer from my department. I make small talk with sometimes, and told him there was a man in the garage who had been following me around the city, and I'd just seen him by my car, and I didn't feel safe going down there alone. Travis stared at me for a second, then said, "Yeah, of course," grabbed his backpack, and walked with me to the elevator. We rode down together. When the doors opened, the man was still by the vending machine. The second he saw I wasn't alone, he straightened, turned away, and walked quickly toward the far end of the parking lot without looking back. Travis watched him disappear behind a row of cars, then turned to me and offered to follow me home. I said no. I just needed him to wait until I got in my car and drove away. Instead of going home, I drove to the police station. I was still shaken from seeing him in the garage, and sitting in my apartment doing nothing felt wrong. At the front desk, I said I'd already filed a report about a man following me and that I'd just seen him again at my work parking lot. The duty officer opened the report and had me go through everything. I told him about the grocery store, the cafe, the mall, and now the garage. I gave the description I'd been repeating in my head. Tall, dark jacket, short dark hair, mid-30s, always alone, never really shopping or working, just standing and watching. He asked if it could be an ex, a coworker, a neighbor, anyone I'd argued with. I told him no, and that I was sure I'd never met this man before. He updated the report, said they'd increase patrols near my building and around my office, and told me that if I saw the guy again, I should only take a quick photo or video if it felt safe, and call 911 if he tried to come near me or block my way. Without threats or contact, that was about all they could do. Driving home, I didn't feel better or worse, just drained. I'd done what you're supposed to do, but it still depended on me seeing him first. In my building's parking lot, I called Jennifer before going inside and told her about the garage, the coworker walking me down, and the station. She didn't say I was overreacting, just told me to text her when I left work and when I got home, and I agreed. For the next 2 weeks, I didn't see him. Not at stores, not in cafes, not near my office. I still checked every aisle and every crowd for that dark jacket, but it never appeared. The fear didn't go away. It just moved into the background. I ordered a doorbell camera, got the building manager's okay, and set it to alert my phone whenever someone passed my door. At first, I watched every clip expecting to see him, but it was only neighbors and delivery drivers. I started changing my routine on purpose. Different stores, different routes, different parking spots, not leaving work at the same time. I shared my live location with Jennifer and a coworker and kept my phone where I could grab it fast. I never found out who he was or why he picked me. Maybe it was random. Maybe he knew me from somewhere I don't remember. Not knowing scared me more than seeing him, because there was no clear reason and no moment where I could say it was over. I don't know if he's still out there or if he moved on after the police got his description. Some nights I still check my windows and door, then tense up when an unknown number shows on my phone. My friends tell me to let it go, that he probably got scared or was clueless, or that he's focused on someone else now. But I can't forget how he watched me in that mall, or how he knew when I'd be in that parking garage. He found me in different parts of the city, waited like time didn't matter, never touched me, and never spoke. The police never caught him, but I know what I saw. The following. The way he matched my routine, the way he shifted when I changed mine, and the quiet, calculated patience of someone who was planning something. Through 3 days after moving in, I saw something in the living room mirror that made my blood run cold. A reflection of a figure that wasn't actually there. But let me back up. I'm 28. I do interior design, and I live in a suburb with my roommate Monica. She breeds rare tropical plants, so her bedroom and the tiny office are packed with orchids and grow lights. My room is normal, the living room is shared, and we both look after her cat, Mirka. Because Mirka chews leaves, Monica has one rule when she travels. Bedroom and office doors stay closed, always. Most weekends she's gone at plant exhibitions. My job is watering. Every morning I water her orchids. Every evening I mist them and check the soil. That Thursday she left for a 3-day conference in Portland. Before she rolled her suitcase out, we did a quick walkthrough. She pointed at each door, then shut her office door herself. I remember her tugging it twice and making me try it so I'd feel the latch catch. Friday morning I did the watering. All doors with plants behind them were closed. I checked Monica's office, my room, the main door, then went to work. The day was the usual mess of clients and emails. Nothing felt off until I came back around 7 with my laptop bag and the little metal watering can. As soon as I opened our apartment door, I smelled something that didn't belong. Not soil, not fertilizer, not cat food. Men's cologne. Not strong, but fresh enough that it felt recent, like someone had been in there. The hallway outside hadn't smelled like that. Inside, it did. We don't have guys over. Neither of us had given anyone a key. I stood there a second, door half open, trying to blame it on someone's perfume rubbing off on my clothes, but it was stronger the farther I stepped in. I locked the deadbolt like I always do, called Mirka, here, and walked into the living room with the watering can. Our landlord had bolted a big mirror to the wall opposite the hallway. From the couch, you can see straight down the hall in the reflection, all the way to Monica's office. I started misting the plants by the window, half watching the spray, half thinking about work, until something in the mirror finally sank in. Monica's office door was slightly open, just a narrow black strip where white should be. From where I stood, I couldn't see the door itself, only the start of the hall, but the mirror showed it plainly, not closed. I had a specific memory of pulling that handle that morning. I don't remember what I had for lunch, but I remembered that. My hand shook when I put the watering can down. I took my phone out and called Monica. She picked up over muffled voices. "Did you happen to come back for something?" "The office door is open," I said. "What?" "No, I'm in Portland. Just got out of a seminar. Are you alone at home?" Her tone changed fast. While she was talking, something moved in the mirror. At the edge of the frame, a shape slid across the hallway, fast but controlled, like someone walking with a purpose. For a second, it was just a shadow. Then I clearly saw a man's shoulder, the side of his head, and an arm as he stepped from the hallway into my bedroom. No sound. Just that easy, practiced movement straight into my room. I stood there facing the window, watching it happen behind me only in the glass. My voice, somehow, stayed calm. "Yeah, probably just the cat. Everything's fine. See you Sunday." I ended the call before she could say anything. Out loud, in a normal tone, I said, "Okay, Mirka, stop messing around," like I was annoyed with the cat. Then I walked to the front door, opened it, stepped into the building hallway, and closed it firmly behind me. I waited to hear the latch click, then took my hand off the knob and dialed 911 with fingers that didn't seem to work right. I was giving the dispatcher our address when I heard the deadbolt turn again. Our door opened. A man in his 40s in a dark jacket and jeans stepped out, pulling the door shut behind him like it was his apartment. He was average height, average build, nothing special, but his expression was completely flat. He saw me, focused, and started walking straight toward me. No, hey, no surprise, just that. I didn't wait. I ran for the stairwell. The elevator in our building is slow and noisy. If I got stuck waiting for it, that was it. I hit the stairwell door with my shoulder and took the first steps down 2 at a time. His footsteps hit the concrete right after mine. Heavier, steady, close. Half a flight down, I realized I was running toward a dark, empty street with nowhere to hide and nobody around. Upstairs, I at least had walls and locks. On the next landing, I spun and sprinted back up past him. My shoulder brushed his jacket. He swore and grabbed, fingers catching air, and I heard him turning as I forced my legs to keep moving. I reached our floor out of breath, yanked my keys from my pocket, and jabbed one at the lock. It slipped once, then went in. I twisted, shoved the door open, dove inside, and slammed it behind me, throwing the deadbolt. I stayed pressed to the wood. "Open up, bitch!" he yelled, pounding the door so hard the frame shook. Each hit came through my back. The dispatcher was still talking in my ear, but I couldn't answer. I shoved the phone into my pocket, scanned the room, and grabbed the only heavy thing in reach, my drawing tablet, from the console. Holding it like a shield, I backed into the kitchen. Everything went quiet for a few seconds. Then glass exploded from the direction of my bedroom, the fire escape window. He'd climbed in. I set the tablet down on the counter, grabbed the biggest meat knife from the block, and crouched behind the kitchen island, trying to control my breathing. He rushed in so fast it felt like the whole apartment shrank. The bedroom door banged, his steps crossed the living room, and then he was at the edge of the kitchen. I stayed crouched behind the island with the knife in both hands, staring at his shoes as they moved past the cabinets. He didn't look down. He went straight to the sink window, breathing hard like he expected it to be open. From where I was, I could see half his face, tight and focused. He hissed, "Where are you?" and checked the counter and the door to the hallway. His back was to me. That was the only advantage I had. If I stayed there, he'd just keep moving until he saw me. The front door was the only thing that made sense. I set the knife on the tile as quietly as I could. If I had to run, I needed my hands free. My legs shook when I stood and slid along the cabinets toward the doorway. He stepped back toward the living room just as I reached it. For a second, we were only a few feet apart. Then he turned left toward the bedrooms. I went right, staying against the wall. The front door was close. It felt far anyway. The deadbolt sounded loud when I turned it. I cracked the door, and the hinge gave that tiny creak I'd heard 100 times and never cared about. This time it sounded like an alarm. His head snapped toward me. "Hey!" he yelled. I yanked the door open and bolted into the hallway. "Help! Police!" My voice came out thin and high. I just ran. My neighbor across the hall, Vincent, opened his door at that exact moment. To me, he'd always been the quiet, retired Marine who said hi on the stairs. He saw my face, then the man coming out of my apartment, and his expression changed like someone flipped a switch. "Inside. Now," he said. I didn't argue. He grabbed my arm, pulled me into his place, and slammed his metal door just as the guy hit it from outside. The frame shook. Vincent threw the deadbolt, slid another lock, and leaned his shoulder into the door like he'd done that move a lot of times before. From the hallway, the man started pounding and kicking. "Open the door! Open up!" Same voice that had screamed through my door, only more wild. The metal barely moved. Vincent didn't move either. "Cops already coming?" he asked over his shoulder. "Yeah," I said. 911. "Good. Stay back," he told me. We listened to the banging and yelling. Then it stopped. We heard hurried steps going toward the stairs. Vincent stayed pressed to the door, counting quietly. Sirens started getting louder outside a few seconds later. After that, everything turned into uniforms, radios, and questions. They cleared our floor, checked my apartment, then spread into the area. They picked him up not far from the building, walking fast like he was just out for air. There was still glass on his jacket from my bedroom window. At the station, they told me his name. It meant nothing to me. When Monica rushed back and heard it, she just sat down and stared at the wall. Later, when I was a little calmer, she explained. Years ago, when she first started breeding orchids, he'd been her business partner. 2 people, tiny setup, big promises. He got obsessed with a hybrid orchid idea and wanted to push it through any way possible. She refused to fake papers or cut corners. They fought, she ended it, and she registered her work without him. He never let it go. According to the detective, he'd convinced himself she'd stolen his idea and ruined his career. He still knew her habits. He knew about the weekend conferences. They found notes in his car with our building and her travel dates written down. He'd been watching the place, waiting for a time she'd be home alone. When he realized she was away and saw me instead, he decided I was a problem. The detective said it straight. I was a witness he wanted to eliminate. The psych report later called it paranoid disorder with fixation on Monica and the orchids. That phrase showed up in every call and letter from the prosecutor, and in the final paperwork they made us sign. In the end, he was sent to a secure facility instead of a regular prison, and they told us he wouldn't be out for a long time, with alerts if anything changed. Vincent and I became friends after that. He says his combat training just kicked in automatically when he heard me screaming and he acted without thinking. I still flinch at unfamiliar reflections. I still check every lock and window before bed. And sometimes I catch myself wondering what would have happened if he hadn't been home that evening, but I try not to think about it too much. Last April, I was working late finishing a presentation for a client at my office on the outskirts of Phoenix. I'm 31, a sales manager, and this client was important, so I stayed until everything looked perfect. Around 11 at night, I finally sent the slides, locked our glass door, did my usual quick check of lights and windows, and took the elevator alone down to the underground parking garage. The garage was almost empty. My car sat near the middle, and 3 other cars were scattered along the far row. It was bright but very quiet, just the buzz of the fixtures. I hit unlock, heard my car chirp, and started walking across the concrete. About halfway there, I heard a low groan somewhere to my left, like someone trying not to yell. I stopped and listened. The sound came again. Between 2 cars, maybe 20 meters away, I saw a man on the ground. He was lying on his side in a dark tracksuit, one leg bent under him, both hands gripping his ankle. I hurried over and asked if he was okay. Up close, his face was pale and sweaty, and he looked embarrassed more than panicked. He told me he'd slipped getting out of his car and that his ankle had gone sideways. When he tried to move it, he flinched hard and said he'd heard something crack, that it might be broken. Then he asked if I could help him up and get him to the exit, said he'd call a taxi and go straight to the hospital from there. I asked which car was his, and he waved vaguely at the row behind him. None of the nearby cars had open doors or dome lights on, but I didn't think too much about that in the moment. I suggested calling an ambulance instead. He shook his head quickly and said his insurance only covered real emergencies, that he couldn't afford an ambulance bill for a bad sprain. So I got his arm over my shoulder and helped him stand. As soon as he tried to put weight on his right foot, his whole body dropped against me. He leaned almost his entire weight onto my side and ended up hopping on his left foot while we shuffled toward the ramp. He swore under his breath each time his injured leg moved even a little. On the way, He made conversation like he was trying to distract himself. He said he worked as an accountant in the neighboring building and had stayed late because of an audit. Then he started asking questions back at me. What I did, what floor I was on, whether I often stayed that late, how busy our office was at night. At the time, it felt like normal small talk. We reached the exit and stepped out onto the sidewalk by the street. He leaned against the low wall, breathing hard, then pulled his phone from his tracksuit pocket. The motion looked pretty smooth for someone in that much pain, but maybe adrenaline does that. He opened a taxi app, ordered a ride to a hospital on the north side, and said the car would be there in 8 minutes. I told him I'd wait with him. Leaving an injured guy alone on the curb at midnight felt wrong, even though I was tired and hungry. He kept thanking me, repeating how lucky it was that someone else had still been in the building. While we waited, he kept circling back to my schedule, asking again what time I usually left and whether many people worked late on my floor. An older sedan pulled up right when the app predicted. The driver was an older man with a gray beard and glasses. I opened the back door and helped the injured man slide inside. The driver asked where to go. The man immediately gave the hospital's name on the north side without checking his phone again. I shut the door, waved, and watched the taxi disappear down the almost empty street. Then I walked back down into the garage, got in my car, and drove home. Out of habit, I glanced at the dashboard clock as I pulled out. It was just after 11. On the drive, I mentally filed the whole thing as one of those random late-night work stories. And honestly, by the time I went to bed, I'd mostly stopped thinking about it. The next day, during my lunch break, I went to a cafe near the office to grab something quick. In line, I ran into Mike, a colleague from a neighboring department. We don't hang out a ton, but we're friendly. So we grabbed a table and started complaining about clients, numbers, sales targets, all the usual. Then I remembered the ankle guy and told Mike what had happened the night before. He listened, then frowned and asked what time it had been. I told him around 11, maybe a little after, since I remembered seeing that on my dash. Mike stared at me for a second like he was checking if I was joking. Then he said he'd also been working late yesterday and had left the building at about 11:15. He said that was exactly why my story bothered him. When he went down to the underground garage, it was completely empty. No people, and not a single car besides his. He said he'd even noticed it because the call center next door usually has night shift cars parked all over that level, and yesterday there wasn't one. Just his car sitting alone by the elevator. I told him that couldn't be right, because when I had gone down there, my car had been there along with 3 others. I described roughly where I'd seen them. Mike didn't smile or try to argue. He just shook his head slowly and said he was sure. He'd parked right by the elevator where you could see the entire garage. I spent the rest of lunch trying to convince myself Mike was wrong, but the more I replayed it in my head, the less sure I was about my own memory. All afternoon, I kept catching myself staring at the clock, thinking back to the walk across the garage. I remembered the echo of my steps, the groan, the tracksuit, the weight of him leaning on my shoulder. But when I tried to picture the other cars, they were just vague shapes in my head. No colors, no models, nothing specific, just 3 cars somewhere over there. By the time I finished work that evening, I had worked myself up enough that I decided to go check. It felt silly, but not checking felt worse. So instead of going straight home, I rode the elevator down and stepped back into the garage. It looked normal, a few cars scattered around, nothing that jumped out as strange. I walked to the spot where I thought I had first seen the man on the ground, between 2 spaces near the middle. I crouched and ran my hand over the concrete, looking for anything that said someone had fallen there. There was nothing. No scuff marks, no dropped keys, no bits of plastic, no spilled drink, nothing at all. I walked the route we had taken toward the exit, checking the floor as I went. Same thing the whole way. Just a clean, boring garage. I checked the corners by the columns, even bent down to look under a couple of nearby cars, feeling more ridiculous with every step. Back upstairs, instead of going back to my desk, I went to the small security office near the lobby. I know the night guard a bit from smoke breaks, so I asked if he could pull the footage from the garage exit around 11 the night before. I told him I thought I had seen something suspicious and wanted to check the time. He sighed about the system being slow, but he did it. Eventually, he found the right camera and we scrubbed forward until we saw me on the screen, shouldering someone and helping them toward the street. From that angle, the other person was mostly just a dark outline, a hood and a shape leaning into me. No face, no details. We kept watching. A taxi pulled up a few seconds later and stopped at the curb. I helped the person into the back seat and shut the door. The guard paused the video and tried to zoom in on the license plate, but the picture fell apart into big blurry blocks and glare from the headlights. Front and back, both plates were just bright smears, no numbers at all. I asked if there were other cameras in the garage. He said 2 were broken, and the third only covered the entrance ramp, not the center rows. On that view, you could just see my car leaving up the ramp a few minutes later and nothing else. I still don't know what happened that night, whether it was innocent or planned. Sometimes I tell myself he really did twist his ankle and just need help. But then I remember his questions and Mike saying the garage was empty. Mike thinks it was a setup, that while I walked him out, someone else could have checked my car or tried to copy my keys. So for days afterward, I checked my wallet, laptop, documents, trunk, and accounts. Nothing was missing, but that feeling stayed, and now I only leave late with trusted coworkers.